This here is yet another viewer's broken gaming PC. This one apparently turns on but does not send a signal to a monitor. Many of you know by now this symptom could mean any number of things is wrong, including the graphics card, improperly seated DRAM, a bad power supply, maybe just something as simple as a bad BIOS config. Maybe clearing the CMOS fixes that. My hunch though is that we have an issue with this graphics card. This is an older MSI Armor, I believe, RX 580, and you can see it is sagging in places that make me extremely uncomfortable, especially toward the front panel here. This side of the card is just, it's not being supported by anything. There's no prop near the front, and of course there's no back plate either to help reinforce the PCB. If I just cut my hand here, we'd have no problems, but yeah, this just pains me to even be around. So even if the card isn't actually to blame, we'll probably end up fixing this with some sort of bracket. As for the remaining specs, the CPU in here is a Ryzen 5 5800X. We have 32 gigs of crucial DDR4 in here. These aren't fancy or anything. They don't have flashy heat sinks on them. There's a 4TB crucial SSD in here and an Asus Prime B550M motherboard. One thing I noticed the owner didn't list in the specification section of our forum, however, is his power supply, which I'm very curious about. Aha, as I suspected, this looks like the power supply that was originally bundled with this pre-built from Asus, and it may or may not have cut some corners. The fact that this just has like a metal sheen on the outside suggests that it's probably a cheaper OEM unit, which could cause problems down the line. Nonetheless, our primary goal in this video is to fix the no picture out issue, which I think we can handle in this one. I hope you'll stay with me. If you're planning your next PC build, then consider checking out our sponsor, VIP SCD Key. Their Windows 10 and 11 OEM keys sell for a fraction of retail and will unlock the full potential of your OS. They'll also remove those pesky activation watermarks. Click the links below to get started today, and be sure to use our special offer code SKGS for a sweet discount on a variety of options, including Windows 10 and 11, Pro and Home, and more. Hello there, and welcome to Fix or Flop. If you're new, just know that everything you see us do in this playlist is free of charge to the owners in question. We don't charge for hardware or replacement labor. Why do I always get that backwards? We don't charge for labor or replacement hardware, and that's thanks to your viewership, so thank you so much for clicking on this video. If you or someone you know has a broken computer and you'd like a chance to have it fixed for free in this playlist, you can submit a form linked in this video's description. Now, of course, we need to be on the same page as the owner, so we're going to attempt to power the system on. We'll see if we can replicate the no signal scenario. I will also say, while we're waiting on this, is the power button up here? Where's the power button on this thing? Is there no power? Oh, it's on the it's on the right side of the front panel. There we go. Something else that I want to point out while we're waiting for this is that this power supply that I mentioned a bit earlier is probably going to be replaced regardless of whether it passes our tester, our inline tester that we'll use a bit later. I'd like to give them a bit more headroom in the wattage area, something a bit more efficient, maybe something much more reliable, just for that extra peace of mind. Because again, I don't want the system coming back because I failed to upgrade the power supply when I had the chance. So yeah, it doesn't look like we're getting any picture out here, which is exactly what the owner described. And I know I already said I suspect the graphics card is to blame here. It seems a bit odd to jump straight to a fairly expensive vital component, but given the age of this card and the symptom, I think it's where we're headed. That said, I'm gonna check easier stuff first. The CMOS, we're gonna check DRAM seating, and a few other things. I've seen simply clearing the CMOS work wonders for rigs like these. I'm gonna take the battery out because I can't find the pins to jump. Keeping this out of the rig for, say a minute to be safe should reset the clock and any funky BIOS settings. Nothing on screen as of yet. Also, the one chassis fan in here is running very loudly. It's spinning very fast. It's not settling down either, which tells me that it's getting hung up somewhere in the post process more than likely. His two DRAM modules do look to be correctly inserted. I'm gonna remove them from the equation though and replace both with a single known working stick from my own stash. I've tried every single slot to rule out a dead memory channel, and we're still stuck with a black screen, no signal out, and the chassis fan is still at full, like max RPM, very loud, so it's still not posting. I wonder, you know, the graphics card fans are not spinning. They don't spin ever. They don't even spin in the beginning. When I first power the rig on, I noticed that this fourth time here powering up with the different RAM config. So I'm curious if this card's even getting power. It might just be like completely bricked, you know, not even like trying to work, maybe like partial deballing. It may be something on the power delivery side of this card is completely out of whack. Let's see what my handy dandy inline PSU tester says about this unit before we move on to the graphics card. So far everything's looking good, no errors, everything is a pass, including ripples, slew rate, and timings. Well, okay, a few red flags around slew rate and the 12-volt rails, just another reason to replace this unit now that we have the chance. About time we get this sagging lump of silicon out of here then. At first glance, I don't see anything alarming. It is a bit dirty. You can see some dust bunnies and things under the fan shroud there. For the most part, it looks good. You guys can pause the video if you want and look through like you usually do. You guys find stuff that I completely miss, and I'm here in person, so I don't really have an excuse. So work your magic. If I miss anything, scream at me in the comment section. Now, I'm not trying to embarrass the owner here. I think we could all learn from this example. I've made similar blunders in the past. He told me that before we picked up this rig, in an attempt to isolate the suspected dead RX 580 himself, he plugged his HDMI cable into the back of his motherboard. Now, I do recommend in those cases removing the graphics card, the discrete card, outright from the system. Sometimes weird BIOS settings could try defaulting to the DGP even when no source cable is detected at the rear. Just to play it safe, pop it out, and then you can connect HDMI or DisplayPort to the back of your board to run off of integrated graphics. That is a logical step in the troubleshooting process, or it would be if the CPU in question supported integrated graphics. If you recall, this is a Ryzen 7 5800X. It does not have baked-in graphics, which means no matter what port you use behind your motherboard, you will never get a picture to your monitor. But yeah, just thought that story was interesting. Might be helpful to some of you if you're troubleshooting a dead graphics card. Make sure that if you're trying to bypass it with your motherboard, that your CPU has integrated graphics. For only 20 to 40 bucks on the used market, this thing comes in super handy for modern PC troubleshooting. It's just plug and play and doesn't require discrete power aside from what it draws from the PCIe slot. In we go then, and this time around I'm actually not dreading a dead RX 580. They're fairly cheap and easy to replace. I'm honestly hoping this is bad because this is probably cheaper than either the motherboard or the CPU at this point. These can be found for like 50, 60, 80 bucks, maybe tops. This is a 4 gig card. It is a 4 gig card, so yeah, definitely on the cheaper side of 580s. And I don't think his 5800X is gonna be 80 bucks to replace. And you know what? It actually looks like the graphics card is not to blame, which is not what I expected at all. That only leaves us with like two possibilities, two major possibilities. Something on the platform side, right? So CPU or motherboard. I haven't ruled out weird, funky wiring, so I'm gonna disconnect everything non-vital at this point and give it one last go before we pull the motherboard out.
A few moments later.
Yeah, that didn't work either. Sometimes you get funky behavior when things like front panel cables are wired incorrectly, but everything was done properly here. Also, I was just curious, I wanted to check CMOS battery voltage. It was a tad bit on the low side. I like to see something around like 3.1-ish volts, but swapping the battery out completely with a brand new one still didn't solve the problem. Not much of a choice then. The platform has to come out, and for those of you wondering if this is some sort of BIOS incompatibility, apparently, according to the owner at least, the system was working perfectly fine one day, and suddenly stopped posting the next with no change in between, at least on a hardware software side. And that does not scream BIOS incompatibility to me. Usually the system doesn't work one day and then stop working the next. Although if we get desperate, we might have to tackle that. I think this can now come out unless I'm missing a screw somewhere. I don't think I've ever had this much trouble removing a motherboard from a case. There's some kind of mystery screw or something keeping this, like, what is this? What am I missing? I mean, am I going crazy? Like, I don't see where I've missed any screw. All the typical locations for them for MATX motherboard layouts have been taken care of, I believe. It feels like something's getting snagged, like, around here. This bracket looks like it's for a Wi-Fi card that's not in this board, but I don't think it's being fastened from the backside. Let me see. You know what? I'm really confused. Yeah, there's nothing here. There's nothing holding the board in on this side. So why is it not? Why can't I take it out? What the heck? Oh my gosh! It's just the rear I/O plate that was just death gripping the ports behind the board. Wow, that's some strong stuff down there. And I'm not seeing anything suspicious as of yet. Nothing burned, nothing has exploded as far as I can tell. I'll show you the back of this board as well. If you guys want to pause, help me out, that would be greatly appreciated. It looks fairly clean though, and if you're wondering, it doesn't look like we have anything shorting the backside of the board. All of these standoffs are in their correct locations. How do our ports look? All right, so far, not too shabby. Let's take a gander at this CPU then. Maybe it was repasted and mishandled. Geez, there's so much thermal paste atop this CPU, about double what there needs to be. This stuff is also super sticky. I'm not sure what brand he used, but I am not a fan. There was also a tiny bit of spillover to the underside of the CPU. I don't think it was enough to prevent the chip from working or communicating properly with the main board, but we're gonna clean this up, make it look brand new, just in case. It's a curious thing, so it looks very good now, especially underneath. I don't see any bent or missing pins. On the top side of this chip, over the IHS, you can see some fairly deep scratches, especially in the upper right-hand corner here. I'm not sure where those are from. I mean, it would take quite a bit of force to scratch this heat spreader here. So a bit interesting. This chip seems to have been through a bit more than the average. The socket, by the way, also looks very clean. There are only a couple of paths we could take then at this point. Either the main board is replaced or the CPU in an effort to isolate the issue. If we replace the motherboard and everything else in his rig works, obviously there's an issue with this. If we replace the CPU and everything else works, including the main board, then his chip is probably bad. Hopefully not both. And also, I'm gonna end up having to buy an MATX motherboard to replace this one with if this is in fact bad, because I don't have MATX boards just laying around. Most of them are ATX. That's the one problem with these different form factors. You know what? I take it back. I actually have a B550M Steel Legend MATX. I think we used this for a recent PC build. Will this replacement work with his original hardware? There is only one way to find out. I know this looks a bit jank, and that's because it is. We won't be keeping the system on for any meaningful amount of time here, apart from just trying for a post. So the CPU is not going to overheat. Don't freak out. Here we go. Let's jump the power pins with this replacement motherboard and all of his other original hardware in here. All right, so the system is on again. Graphics card fans are not spinning. Well, now they are. Oh, they never did that before. Check it out. I think this is a great sign considering we weren't seeing anything like this at all before. This board also has a set of debug LEDs, which should help us troubleshoot further if we still have issues. Oh wow, look at that. We've got a post. So it doesn't look like there are any of the remaining issues. Replacing the motherboard was the solution, which it's a bit odd. I mean, physically, that original board looks fine. We'll look over it again in a second. But again, just recounting with the owner, he told me it was working fine one day. He comes back another day to turn it back on like he has dozens of times before, and it just doesn't want to play ball anymore. I tell you, motherboard issues are probably some of the most finicky. And again, the symptom didn't scream initially BIOS incompatibility, at least for me, and I know that some of you are going to disagree with this. I'm just trying to explain my rationale here. The fact that this board was playing nicely originally with the CPU, with the 5800X, and then all of a sudden one day just decided not to, that's not normally how BIOSes behave. They either work or they do not with said CPU. That said, there's still much more we can do with this board. We're gonna dive deeper into this and try to flash a BIOS. We'll also try an older CPU, one that should work natively with this B550 chipset, something like a 3600, to see if we get any sign of life from it before we write it off completely. So let's do just that then. I'm gonna fire up this makeshift test bench here with a Ryzen 5 3600 and a known working stick of DDR4, of course, our GT 1030, and a known working power supply. So the only part from his original rig is the motherboard. If we don't get a post here, I think it's safe to say that his motherboard is cooked. Let's go ahead and fire it up. All right, it is on. I know it doesn't look like it's on, but it is. I am curious if, yeah, the chip is warming up. So that's a good sign. It's a good start. It means we don't have a catastrophic power delivery failure. But we're still not getting a signal to our monitor. What is going on? I don't understand why we can't get picture out. It just doesn't want to play ball with any combination of hardware. This is sort of a last-ditch effort, but I've got a Ryzen 5 3400G here. Let's try an APU and bypass the discrete graphics card outright. See, in the case of an ATX board, if we suspect we have a defective PCIe slot, we can just move our discrete card down to the next big slot. But since this is an MATX board, we only have one of those, so we're just gonna remove it from the equation entirely. This is gonna be the board's last chance in my possession before I either end up sending it to somebody else for more intensive inspection and or repair. or it becomes a donor board of some sort, which is what it's looking like. I'm feeling the heat over the 3400G, so that's a good start, but still no reaction from our monitor. Oh, we do. What? We have picture. But here's the problem with the logic down the path that we're headed by addressing the BIOS revision at this point. The fact that the Ryzen 5 3600 came out, if I recall, in 2019. Build date 2021. There's absolutely no reason why we wouldn't have support natively for a 3000 series processor, let alone an APU. So either way we slice this, even if I update the BIOS to the most recent for this Prime B550MK, we're still not gonna get picture out with a discrete card because there's something inherently wrong with the slot itself. But don't worry, we're gonna see this through. So it looks like the latest BIOS update for this board was released September of 2024. Of course, the Agesa update baked in along with some software vulnerabilities, some processor security issues that are addressed with it as well. We're gonna flash this one. It still retains support for the 3600 and see how we fare. Swing over to, what is it called? Easy Flash, there we go. And that there is our .cap file. We'll click yes, we'll click yes again. It's gonna read, selected file is not a proper BIOS. That's really suspicious because it's saying it's not correct, but it is. Well, you know what I just realized? This motherboard came out of a pre-built, right? Obviously it's an Asus pre-built. It is labeled a G15DK mainboard, even though it is also labeled a Prime B550MK. Unfortunately, the pre-built spec of this motherboard is a little different than the real Prime B550MK that you or I could buy to build a custom PC. And so the Prime B550MK BIOSes on the page that you're seeing here don't actually work with this pre-built spec, which is why we saw the message we just did in the BIOS while attempting to flash. That means, unless there's like a, I don't know, an archive of pre-built BIOSes somewhere, there's no official BIOS update support for these pre-builts, which is really bizarre. If somebody can point me in the right direction in the comments, feel free, I'd appreciate it. But I don't actually think I can update this. So there goes that idea. I would still say, confidently, however, that this isn't BIOS related, because again, if a 3400G works, a 3600 should most definitely work. Heck, his 5800X was working perfectly fine in here prior to this, but the fact that we don't have anything in the PCIe slot and we get a post through integrated graphics tells me it's likely a PCIe issue. And I suppose one more way to prove that is to keep the 3400G in here, since we know we get a post with that APU, install a discrete card, and simply move over the HDMI cable to said discrete card. Is my assumption correct? Here we go. Oh, you know, I should turn the power supply on. There we go. All right, jumping the power pins. Come on. Okay, it actually does sound like it might post. Fan curve ramp down. Wow, I was completely wrong about that. All right, that's great. Why then would neither of my CPUs work? I don't understand. Why would at least a 3600, like as basic bare bones as Zen 2 gets, for a B550 board, pre-built spec or not, why would this not work here? You know what, I'm just gonna, in one take here, I'm gonna swap in the 3600 and we're gonna fire it back up here. Just want to see, I'm just setting this cooler on top of the chip. It's not actually doing much, and there's not a lot of mounting pressure, so it is just for post-checking purposes. Here we go. What's it gonna do now? Yeah, see, that's so weird. Now, the fan curve is not ramping down. I can tell you just by the behavior of this cooler that we have on top of the chip, it's not gonna post. That is just bizarre. What kind of BIOS supports a 3400G but not a 3600? All B550 boards should support 3600s. Like, what on earth is going on here? See, if we look at a stock photo for an Asus Prime B550 MK vanilla, not out of a pre-built spec, you'll notice that below the full-length PCI slot, we don't have any indication that this is a G15DK. Ours, however, does have that indication, and it's obviously because it came out of an Asus pre-built, and that's what's keeping us from updating the BIOS and really moving forward anymore here. I saw a few recommendations online about using like a custom flashing tool, which I actually have, I just don't know how to use yet. I'm still in the process of learning how to use it to fix especially bricked motherboards, but I don't think that's gonna bypass the situation either, because I don't think that those BIOSes for these non-pre-built specs are actually compatible. Whether you force the flash or not, I don't think it's gonna work. And you saw the notification again, it wouldn't even let us move forward with attempting to flash, which I probably would do at this point, because otherwise there's no sense in keeping this original board since it's not working with his original 5800X, and it's a much better CPU than either a 3600 or a 3400G. I don't think we have much of a choice. The motherboard needs to be replaced because the only other alternative is to downgrade a CPU, which of course I'm not going to do. Whether this is a free service or not, that's just a bit of a bizarre fix if you even want to call it that. We're going to keep his 5800X in the system, and then we're going to replace his original main board with one that is going to be much more BIOS update friendly in the ASRock Steel Legend B550 that we have here. This desk somehow got very dirty. We had like 2 different systems running here just for the sake of testing components. I think everything else in his pre-built works, but I still want to upgrade the power supply. I mentioned that earlier. That's definitely coming out. Not that I don't trust it. I just don't trust any pre-built power supply. I've been trained not to trust them because most of them are in fact garbage. Well, Greg, actually, my pre-built power supply is great. Good for you. Most of them suck. So we're going to get rid of the one in there, and then we're going to keep the replacement board, put everything else original back in, and try for a post. So I've got the motherboard mostly situated now. I think I'm going to go ahead and replace the power supply, introduce the new one. I'm sure you know where this is headed, and then we'll get the remainder of it wired up, put the graphics card in, fire it up for one last time, and confirm that everything still works. Thankfully, Asus uses a standard size power supply, which means swapping should be a breeze. We're coming from 550 watts, so why not upgrade them to a 750 watt power supply in the Be Quiet Pure Power 12M. It's 80+ gold certified, it's fully modular, it comes with the latest ATX standards for the latest graphics cards. The card in here currently in the viewer's rig is a little underwhelming, right? It's an RX 580, so if he upgrades that, which I expect will be the next big upgrade for this system, he's gonna have the additional wattage headroom, which is, yeah, it's gonna come into play at some point, right? Maybe 750 watts is overkill, especially for now. Maybe it's overkill if he upgrades to like a, I don't know, RTX 3060 or what have you, but having the additional wattage headroom is always just peace of mind. He won't have to worry about his power supply for several years, and that's why I'm happy to upgrade him with this. With what we need connected, we'll go ahead and slide this in fan side down. Yes, Asus actually did leave ventilation at the bottom of this pre-built chassis, despite their pre-built power supply not suited to work that way. Just want to make sure it's going to be a snug fit. I know it's not necessarily intended to be running a power supply this big in here. It's a snug fit, but at least it does fit. And of course, I'll save the box. I've got the additional cables inside, give these to the owner when we drop the system back off if he ever needs to upgrade, expand, add additional cables, or even RMA the product for whatever reason. Stuff happens, he'll have this in his possession. I wanna thank Be Quiet for being a continued product sponsor for this channel. You can learn more about the Pure Power 12M series via the link below. We've got the bulk of cabling now taken care of. We can now reinstall our graphics card, which we have confirmed, if you recall, works in this config, this new platform. There we go. And I know I said I would address the sag in this video. The problem is the anti-sag brackets that I have from Lee & Lee are only compatible with ATX motherboards. This, of course, is an MATX form factor, and I don't have props small enough to fit under this card and yet atop the basement. Most of my props are actually about from here atop the basement to maybe the PCB height. So there's like no way, and I don't want to put I'm not going to put anything on the bare PCB. That's not smart. So I would have to find something shorter. I don't have anything on hand, but I am going to recommend a few solutions to the owner. Rest assured, it will at least be mentioned to him. Let's go ahead and power this up and try for that post one last time before we meet up with the viewer. Ah, there we go. Fan curve ramps down. That's always a good sign. Yes, there's our post. Now I've got the owner's original SSD, obviously back in the rig. It was an NVMe, and this is going to require us to reset TPM, which is why it says this. We'll quickly move through it and make sure that we load back into Windows. Well, close enough. We're at the BitLocker recovery screen, which is normal in the event that you have this set up in Windows and you have a motherboard, let's say, swapped out or something. It could prove to be a security risk, a vulnerability, and so it's actually a good thing this is tripping if he has set it up. And I've confirmed with him off camera that he does have the recovery key, so he'll be able to access Windows himself once it's back in his possession. This one was a bit jarring then. I'll be the first to admit I really didn't expect things to go this way based on the symptom, but that just goes to show you, I mean, you could have any first impression you want. It's if it's something else, you're gonna find out very quickly. The graphics card turned out to be okay despite this annoying sag. Don't see any issues there. The motherboard, however, seems to be the culprit, and for whatever reason, it looks like we're having some sort of BIOS incompatibility. It was working fine before, and there I go in video, right, saying that this isn't how it works. Like it's not just gonna work one day and then stop working the next if you don't ever touch the BIOS. The owner still might, I mean, I can't speak for, I don't have facts here, right? I'm just going off of the word of the owner. I don't suspect he has any reason to lie to me, but from what I was told, he never addressed anything in the BIOS between the time it worked and when it didn't. And so that's a very curious thing. But again, I want to open it up to you guys in the comment section below. If you have any idea how we might be able to recover this board. Again, I don't think that trying to manually flash or like force a flash onto the chip itself with a special tool is going to work here, because I don't think that any of the BIOSes for the retail version of this board are compatible with the pre-built spec. I'm not sure why ASUS decided to do it that way. I'm sure it's not only an ASUS thing, but it is very frustrating and it has pretty much forced my hand. I've had to replace the board in order to get this system to fire up again, to post, and to ultimately load into Windows, or close enough to Windows as we can get here. Now again, I'd like to reiterate, if you or someone you know has a broken computer and you'd like a chance to have it fixed for free in this playlist, we only require two things. Firstly, that you'd be okay with us filming this process. We monetize these videos, that's how we make money. That's why we don't charge for the troubleshooting or the labor baked in. And the other thing, the other requirement is that you have to be local to the Central Florida area. Now you can be from Miami or Jacksonville or wherever, but as long as you drive to meet me in person, to drop the system off and pick it back up, it will be me that you meet and not some random person who's vouching for me. Those are the only two things that we ask, and we'll try to get to you as soon as possible. Again, that form is linked in the description. Thank you so much for your continued support here by watching this playlist, and be sure to stay tuned for the next one. My name is Greg. Thanks for learning with me.